Fired. I call the member for Dawson.
You could be forgiven for why we're here in the 21st century talking about the threat of TB in the Australian Parliament, because surely tuberculosis almost disappeared in the 19th century with 19th century novelists who wrote of consumption as an everyday occurrence, both giving to their characters and falling victim to it themselves. And sadly, TB, which was the cause of the death of all three birth certificates and the famous Bronte sisters, and on at least two more of their siblings, is not a thing of the past. Not only has it remained commonplace in some countries, it is now bigger, better and badder than ever before. Having developed effective treatments for TB last century, we now see a growing trend of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And amongst the countries where it's commonly found, we include Papua New Guinea. The Western Province is one of the most marginalised areas of PNG and also the closest province to Australia. It's only a short boat ride away in a little open dinghy to the current Aussie border. And let's not forget that PNG gained independence from Australia as recently as 1975. Healthcare in the Western Province of PNG is not like healthcare in Australia. And I've got to say that that fact has seemingly been forgotten by those opposite. A recent report revealed how Daru Hospital was basically just a hospital in name only. The facility was without a doctor, a radiography and pathology unit that was not operational, and a pharmacy devoid of even the most basic medicines that we would find here in Australia. The hospital building itself was dilapidated, had no access to clean water and no regular supply of electricity. And yet this is the very same hospital that those opposite think is a suitable defence at the moment against the spread of tuberculosis through the Torres Strait Islands and onto mainland Australia. And let's be clear about one thing. The spread of drug-resistant TB to Australia is not only inevitable under the government's current approach, it's already happening. In March, Queensland Health was investigating 6 cases of TB amongst Torres Strait Islander families with connections to Papua New Guinea. Alarmingly, 2 Aussies living in Torres Straits have already developed a deadly strain of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. The spread of TB into Australia is not unexpected. In fact, Cairns-based TB specialist Stephen Vincent assured us that it was inevitable. He predicted in The Australian on October 30 that we would see multi-drug resistant TB in Australia in the next 6 to 12 months at the most. That inevitability was drawn from 2 certainties: Australia's border to the north being extremely porous, and on the other side of the border, a disastrously high prevalence of TB, and in particular, dangerous growth in the incidence of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. But Australia, for now, has one of the lowest rates of TB in the world. But in Papua New Guinea, TB consumes 13% of all hospital bed days and is the cause of 11% of all deaths in the Western Province. TB in that incredibly close neighbouring country is more prevalent than the rampant HIV virus, and a person with untreated infectious TB of the lungs can infect another 10 to 16 people every year. This is a country where the spread of TB is out of control and where the strains of TB are increasingly uncontrollable. This is a country whose shoreline is a short tinny ride away from Australia. Of course, this disease is going to find its way into Australia without the frontline defence. The Torres Strait Treaty allows thousands of PNG nationals to cross the border every year for ceremony and for trading. And they're not meant to cross the border for the purposes of seeking healthcare, but they actually do. PNG nationals desperate for tuberculosis treatment know they're not going to find it in the Western Province and choose to take the boat ride south in search of life-saving treatment. To date, they found that treatment on Saibai and Boigu Islands in the Torres Strait. Queensland Health has been treating PNG nationals on compassionate grounds at these 2 clinics. It's an expensive exercise, but it's got to be said it's worth it. These 2 clinics have been the frontline defence for this disease, and without these clinics, those same desperate people will continue their journey, probably even more south, to the more populous part of Australia, bringing the disease closer to the mainland and closer to a very expensive health and humanitarian disaster in Australia. But without warning, this government, the federal government, which should know only too well how porous those borders are up there, decided it didn't want to fund those TB clinics. The Queensland Government earlier this year ordered the closure of TB outreach clinics on Saibai and Boigu effective June, their decision based on the discontinuance of federal funding for the service. Federal Government decided instead to provide funding for treatments in the Western Province, and that decision immediately raised concerns in that area. At the coalface, we got the Mayor of the Torres Strait Islands Regional Council, who said he was concerned about the health risk to his islander residents when PNG nationals continued to turn up regularly for treatment and continued to come to the island. Health professionals too raised serious concerns about the effectiveness of trying to treat and prevent TB through a health system in the Western Province that is at best dysfunctional and at worst completely broken. It now appears that the WHO, World Health Organisation, has taken an interest in the situation now developing in the Torres Strait and PNG. While Australia spends nearly $5 billion a year on foreign aid around the world, and we have a Prime Minister wanting to send more money to the IMF to lend to the European Union so they can bail out Greece, we see a paltry $1.1 million invested in the prevention of this deadly disease right on our doorstep. Right on our doorstep. Once again, we see a government struggling to deal with something of basic importance to this nation, taking something that is currently working and trying their hardest to break it. But it isn't just a matter of waste of money. It's a dangerous, very dangerous threat to the health of Australians. This is a move that takes our healthcare back to the 19th century. Spending foreign aid in a place of dire need in our own region is commendable, but it is not enough to be effective. And to withdraw the safety net, the protection afforded by the TB clinics in the Torres Strait clearly endangers the Australian public. The Australian public is just as concerned as health professionals and the people of Torres Strait. Of residents in my electorate contacting my office with their concerns. Renate Kupfer of Slade Point, Sandra and Richard Braddock of North Mackay, Laura Terry of Mackay, Mark Lauder of Havana, Terry Liotta of Mackay, Bridget Foley of Walkerston, Lily Hutchin of Beaconsfield, Chris Land of North Mackay, Keith and Anne McCollum, both pastors at the Holy Trinity Anglican Church in Mackay, Leanne Shepherd of Bocasia, Deborah Ray of Glenella. These residents have contacted me, North Queenslanders, even though they live 1,000 kilometres from the Torres Strait, are acutely aware of the dangers posed by the premature closing of TB clinics on Saibai and Boigu Islands. We have a great Torres Strait Islander population in Mackay. There's also fantastic people of that descent in Townsville and in Cairns, many of whom travel back to their island homeland regularly. And without these clinics, the front line of defence against tuberculosis, the risk of infection for those people, residents of Mackay, residents of Townsville, residents of Cairns, grows and grows. And what happens when they come back home? When they come back home, perhaps infected with TB, back to Mackay, back to Townsville, back to Cairns. The closure of these clinics, Mr Deputy Speaker, is a great risk to North Queenslanders everywhere. Funding and developing a tuberculosis program within the Western Province, yes, it's admirable, and it's to be encouraged, but it must be given time to work. Those opposite say that the TB clinics in the Torres Strait are a band-aid solution, but you can't rip off the band-aid without the healing process beginning. The optimal solution must be properly funded, and it must be developed intelligently, and it must be given time. Advice must be sought from health professionals and the people on the ground. Advice must be sought and it must be heeded. We are asking the federal government to fund the treatment of foreign nationals, and it's also a defence against TB spreading to our own country. The continuation of TB clinics must be funded on humanitarian grounds, but also as an insurance against the health disaster in this country. Mr Speaker, I've got to say I've sat through a fair bit of this debate, and I have found it very disappointing hearing the comments coming from those on the other side. Disappointing that Labor are walking away from something which should have a bipartisan approach. Disappointed that they're prepared to sacrifice the health of Torres Strait Islanders and North Queenslanders. Disappointed that they've suddenly adopted a partisan approach on this. Disappointed with the attacks on the local member, for goodness sake. The attacks on the local member who knows all about this, and we've had attacks on him from people from Adelaide who wouldn't know Saibai from Samoa. But the reality is this person, the member for Leichhardt, does, and he knows that these clinics need to stay open. The people up there know it needs to stay open. The government's the only one saying it shouldn't.